Okay. His passion is helping executives create a masterpiece personally and professionally. His books include The CEO Code and Idiot's Guide Management Skills. I am very, very honored to have David Rohlander here with me today. David, welcome.
Thank you, Maureen. So nice to be with you. This is a kind of a propitious day to be talking to a fighter pilot. Just last night in the news, I'm sure all of your listeners, although this will be after the fact by some time that they see this, but we've just taken a big swat at a hornet's nest. I think it's going to be it's going to be unbelievable to see what happens.
On that solemn note, did we just declare war, is what you're saying?
No, I don't think so. But we definitely upped the ante. If you're playing poker, we've just upped the ante quite a bit.
Yeah.
Or he, whatever.
Well, it's a we. We.
Yeah, no, we'll all. It's guys like me when I was young that'll go out and do all the dirty work, but they just sit in their ivory tower in Washington, and like that one video I saw where he says, "You just push a button," and but we want to get into politics, so we have to be careful.
Yeah. So okay, let's shift this a little bit because.
You want to? If you want to go there, I mean, I've done a lot of radio. I get calls once in a while like this, which I really appreciate. You giving me an opportunity to talk to your tribe. But I have gotten calls in the past from radio stations, TV stations, and the like. Not the big majors, but others. There's so many. There's thousands of them out there, and they always want to talk about the current president, Donald Trump, and his communication. And given that communication is an area I do a lot of work in, I have been encouraged and coerced and persuaded to talk about it quite a bit. So I don't mind talking about it. It's just that I don't want to taint the water of your tribe because there's such strong opinions. We've got people on both extremes that are marginally. I mean, they're here's my hands. They're out here, right? They're off the screen. They're like rabid dogs on both sides.
Well, I think that there is a segue here in the sense that this divide, we can't stand if we're continually divided on this extreme. And it will take inspirational leaders, not necessarily the leaders that we voted into office and or didn't vote into office, to make that change. And we've been waiting for them to make the change, and we realized that it's not coming. Yeah. So with communication, which has been an element that has come out of this summit, how important the face-to-face and reestablishing communication and connection as an inspirational leader. And I put my faith in you. Where is your stand in the world to bring people together?
Where do I personally stand in the world about bringing people together? I'm a what some would call a God-fearing man. I have a very strong spiritual side to my nature and to my makeup and my being. And I believe that we should be a reflection of a loving God and not some, so often people say, well, who do you really admire? Who do you really admire as an inspirational leader? And when I think of the people that I know and my experience obviously affects this, I don't know anybody in Washington that I particularly respect. And what's interesting when I hear myself say that is that my book, The CEO Code, which I'll just write the CEO Code, the C stands for communication, the E for execution, the O for operations. But if you look in the book, chapter 2, this is unbelievable. chapter 2 is all about respect. Respect. And I just said, I can't think of many people or anybody in Washington that I respect. Yet in the book, what I say is everyone deserves respect as a human being. So that's a conundrum, because here I've just belied what I've written in the book. Isn't that interesting? I don't know if interesting is the right word for it, but according to what I've written in the book, everybody deserves respect. And in my core, I believe that, but I just heard myself say that I don't respect anybody in Washington. And so let me unpack that a little bit. It's respect is just a word, and it is much more than that, really. And it's your attitude toward people. It's just like the Salome, or whatever the guy's name was, the general that just got killed. They say that he killed hundreds and hundreds of people. Now, why is it so easy for people to accept, well, he's killed hundreds and hundreds of people and there's no consequence? And then when somebody puts in a consequence, they take him out. They say, oh, they should have never done it. It's not because they care about the people that got killed. It's because they're worried about themselves. And this fellow that just got killed, because of the way he was taken out, everybody knows. There was a thing on the news this morning from Bloomberg, and oil has spiked $4 a barrel. Mm-hmm. Everybody does, and this goes back to leadership. I'm going to come back to this, Maureen. Forgive me. If you want to erase this and start over, we can.
You know what? This is who you are. Foreign policy. Keep going.
Everybody does everything they do for a reason, to gain a benefit and avoid a loss. And so when we say something, when we believe something, when we take action, we're taking it typically for some reason. Now, ideally, a leader is taking action because they want to help the people that they're leading, or the constituents that they have as far as customers or clients go. And so ideally, we want to think and we want to believe that everybody intrinsically really cares about others more than they do themselves, but that's not reality. Everybody has self-interests. The thing that annoys me, and I think a lot of other people, is that in Washington, there's so many people that are so flagrantly self-interested in just their own selves, and they don't care about the people. So we get upset. I get upset because they don't care. It's like when I was in the service, I was in the Air Force. I flew in Vietnam, 208 combat missions, as you know, Maureen, but that's for the other people's sake. And the reality is, when I was in that conflict, and I was over there for almost a year in Vietnam, I flew reconnaissance at night, low-level nighttime, over enemy territory and whatever. We lost a lot of guys. But what's interesting to me, as I look back on it as an old man now, looking back on my youth, when I was young, dumb, and full of vinegar, I was just doing a job, and I was just doing what I was told to do. And I obeyed, and I said, yes, sir. That's what you have to do in the military. You say, yes, sir, and you do whatever they say. And the people that were telling me what to do, in my opinion, were marginally competent or incompetent, especially the people in Washington, D.C. But the generals, and at that time in the military, my assessment, and I'm relatively discerning in assessing people. I've developed a lot more skill than I had back then when I was in the service. But the people that were staying in the military at that time and were getting rank, i.e. becoming majors, lieutenant colonels, and all that stuff, in large measure were there because they couldn't get a real job. And so they stayed in the military, was what we would say. That a lot of us thought that. Now, obviously that's not completely true. There's some wonderful, wonderful people in the military, but a large percentage of them were staying in the military because that was, at that time, jobs were tough, and it was a good job. It paid decent at that time. You got to travel. There were a lot of benefits to it. And so there were a lot of people that stayed in just because it was comfortable or because they thought it was the best alternative that they had. And you don't really think about you're going to maybe die tomorrow. Um, people say, "Oh, thank you for your." Now, when I came back, nobody said it, but now they say, "Thank you for your service." Fortunately, when I came back, I just came here for the holiday, Christmas holiday and New Year's, and then I went to Germany for the next 3 years. So I wasn't even in America for those 4 or 5 years when all of that Vietnam rebellion, or when the people were revolting against the war in Vietnam. I was in Southeast Asia and in Europe the whole time. I missed it all. So I didn't get tainted by that much. But what was interesting to me was that there was a higher threat to my life, in my opinion, as a pilot, coming from the people that were in charge. The military and the political people that were in charge were a higher threat to me getting killed because of the way they made decisions, which I thought was really ignorant, than the Viet Cong or the enemy. That's kind of crazy. Now you think about the military's changed a lot, and I love the military and I love America and I'm a patriot and all that stuff. But they call, the polite way to say it is the fog of war. The fog of war. It's really screwed up. War is hell, and all that kind of stuff is really. A lot of people die for no good reason whatsoever. The stupid things happen all the time, just like car accidents here in the U.S. But we're off on a tangent. So what does a leader do?
Or better yet, Sam. So you are a leader, and you are where leaders listen to you as for CEOs. Where's the shift, David? What do we need to do as a society?
Well, I think that's the answer. The answer is you and me and the people watching this video and attending and being part of your tribe. Each one of us has to take responsibility for ourselves and the way we behave. Like a lot of leaders, like sales managers, they're leaders, and they think they have to motivate the troops. Military term, sorry about them. Motivate the salespeople. That you can't motivate other people, in my opinion. You don't motivate other people. You create an environment. And what we do not have in Washington right now is a very healthy, congenial environment. When you think of the civility that is required to coexist, it's amazing. And then when you throw in different cultures, it gets really, really crazy. Interesting tidbit, my roommate in pilot training was from Tehran, Iran. He was an Iranian. And I have many friends that are Iranians. I know a lot of wonderful people that are Iranians that are all here in the U.S. now. And they're good people. This is horrible. In my opinion, this is horrible what's going on. And everybody that I talk to here, which is well over, I probably have good friends, over a dozen good Iranian friends. I've even married. I became a minister to marry my son. Online you can get your paper and do that. And he asked me if I wanted to be his best man or marry him. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, Dad, you can go online and, you speak all the time anyway. It'll be easy for you and you can marry us. And I said, well, if you want me to, I'd be happy. So I did that. I have the license. And I've done a few other weddings since then. I married one of my clients from Ernst & Young at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. It was an incredible bash. Big, 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 big deal. And I married a young lady who was a widow. And she married a young fellow that had never been married, and they were both Iranians. So I know a lot of Iranians, and I really feel for the people because, from my experience, my personal, it's kind of like being a grunt or a pilot in the military, and you do what you're told, yes sir, and you do whatever they say, or yes ma'am. Now there's a lot of women in charge, and you just do it. And ours is not to reason why, ours is just to do or die, right? That's one of the sayings that they have. And in fact, I was just talking to my wife before I came up to talk to you, and I was watching the news because I'm intrigued by what's going down right now. It's kind of traumatic. People are saying this is the most important or the most significant decision that Trump has or ever will make. calling in that strike. But we were talking, and my wife is a very conservative, reserved lady. She is the classic lady. She had a very successful career in education, and she was known as an incredibly disciplined, very intelligent valedictorian of her class, and she carries herself with dignity in every situation. And she was just saying while we were watching the news before I came up here, how so many people are so ill-informed and don't know what's really going on. And that's one of our responsibilities as followers and leaders or whatever. We need to be informed about what's really going on. And I believe that the reason, whether that's being informed of what's going on in your teenager's life right now, whether they're vaping or not, or whatever the issue might be. And we need to be informed, and we need to be accountability. And what most leaders, or many, not most, some leaders have an issue with is accountability, not of their people, but of themselves. They have to be accountable for their behavior, for what they say, for the way that they say it. That's an area that Trump has an issue, right? He's sometimes very loose of tongue, which is not a good thing for a leader. Very, very bad for a leader to do that. But they have to set the example, and they have to be accountable to their people and to their constituents. It's very, very important. And most leaders, especially, once they get to a high position, it's like, what did Huxley, was it Huxley? No. Lord Acton said, power corrupts, absolute power absolutely corrupts. And when leaders get into a position where they have power, there's a very, very enticing environment to do whatever you want. You're the boss. You're in charge. And there are a lot of sayings about that, right? If you really want to know what a person's made of, give them power or give them money and see what they do. It's like when I was a kid, there was a show on TV called The Millionaire. It was a fascinating study because this guy would come with a check and he'd give it to some family or to somebody. And then the story on TV was all about what happens to that family or that person, because now they have and that's back when $1 million was a lot of money, in the 50s and 60s of last century. So it's personal accountability, personal responsibility, realizing that the only person you control and motivate is yourself. And a leader needs to create an environment where others are motivated. This is interesting, I think. I'm putting together a group of executives. We call it Island Executive Forum. And we're just going to have 10 to 12 executives. We're going to meet once a month. I do this kind of thing. And I was talking to a lady yesterday who is in the finance business, a very attractive young lady, divorced, very articulate, from back east, the northeast, Vermont, actually. And she just left one firm and went with another firm. And the reason she did that, as she's explained to me why she did it, was she liked the company, she liked the firm, she liked what they did, but she didn't quite feel a full part of the firm, because she said, I had to really scramble to keep up with the good old boys club. And she said they were nice to me and all that, but it's just I wasn't included. She said, they're going to have the game night, and they'd all go to see a basketball game in the Final Four and that. And I, it wasn't that they were rude or anything like that. It's just that I wasn't a part of that, and they didn't think to invite me, and I probably wouldn't want to go anyway. And so it was kind of like you're the stepchild or the foster child or something in a family. And she didn't feel comfortable. So she just switched to another firm where she feels much more a part of the family. What do they say? They say that you hire people because of their skills, and you fire them because of their inability to effectively communicate and get along with the team.
So again, after speaking to quite a few amazing leaders, the thread through it all is the ability to communicate, and that lack of is completely alienating so many people, even though there's so much social interaction. It's not connecting, and it's not communication and one-on-one.
And see, what a lot of people focus on is what we now call political correctness.
Mhm.
But in reality, political correctness is very sterile, and it's very artificial, because now you're just using a word, or you're saying something, or you're not allowing somebody to say something because of some arbitrary perspective. Political correctness is the biggest con, I think, that's been put out there. And the reason for that is, let me explain the reason for that, and then I have another point about communication. The reason that I think political correctness is a con is because in reality, political correctness all depends on what has been your personal past experience. If you know anything about emotional intelligence, and hopefully all of your tribe have read books and really studied emotional intelligence, because it is a critically important area, right? There was a fellow by the name of Morris Massey, who was a psychologist many years ago, came out with a training video, but it wasn't a video, it was a film. That's back when they used films, training films. That shows you how many years ago it was. And the name of it was "What You Are Now Is Where You Were When."
Mm.
And Morris Massey is his name. I think he's still alive. I don't know. But basically what he says, and what his study showed, was that when someone, male or female, is being raised in those formative years, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, that preteen period, whatever's going on in your life, where you're living, what your familial situation is, what neighborhood you live in, what's going on in your school, whether your work don't work, whether you have money or don't have money, whether you're poor or rich, whether there's antagonism in the house, whether there's joy in the house, whether you're going to church or synagogue, or whether you're not and you're going out partying and get whatever is going on in your life in those formative years shapes, in your heart and in your mind, shapes your value structure. So the best example I can think of is that my grandparents, actually my wife's grandparents, were very, very frugal. And that's because they were that age during the Great Depression, 1929, 1930. And so I remember Grandma used to save plastic bags. She'd fold them, and everything was, they were frugal, very, very, very frugal. Everything had value, even things that had no value. They had value because they were so frugal. They just tried to hold on to stuff. And so wherever you were, and I've done this in a lot of seminars, had people, close your eyes and now go back with me. Where were you when you were 12 years old? Where were you living? What was your street address? What was the neighborhood like? What was going on in your lives? And close your eyes. And I say it slowly and softly so people can get relaxed. And what do you remember from that time in your life? And we know from emotional intelligence and from the studies that scientists and medical people have done on emotion and the way the brain works, that memory is emotion specific. And what that means is we remember whatever we do because of the intensity of the emotion in that experience. That's why if I asked you to go back in your memory, or you do this with yourself, it's obvious to anybody, I'm sure, that if you think about what do you remember, you remember things where there's been an emotional component. Do you remember what was going on June 13th in 1967?
I'm not that.
There are some people that actually can do that, right? Their brain is wired that way, and they can actually tell you what was going on that day, what day of the week it was, and all this stuff. Well, I know what just triggered when I said that to you was 1967 was the year that I was in Vietnam. So I was probably flying in combat on that day. But, what the thing is that I wouldn't necessarily remember that date, but I remember certain incidences I had that year, 1967, that I was over there. And the reason I remember it is those things that I remember was because of the emotional component of it. Like I remember the day that one of the mechanics got a Dear John letter and went out to one of the airplanes and sat in the back seat of the aircraft, it's a fighter, and pulled the handle of the ejection seat without a parachute on and killed himself because he got a Dear John letter. Now his folks got a letter that said, he died with an honorable right, and they try and make it as nice and polite as possible and make him sound like a hero. But the reality was he got a Dear John letter and pulled the handle on the ejection seat, went a couple hundred feet into the air, came back down, died. So you remember crazy things because of the emotion. And political correctness is all about that. So a word, whatever that word is, that offends you or offends me is because I have an emotional connection from the past with that word that gets triggered. And we don't want to go into all the way the brain works, but it gets triggered by the amygdala and we reflex. It shoots the endorphins and the adrenaline and we have a reaction to it. And that's political correctness. So when we were talking just a little bit about the leader and communication and what's so important, and I said, well, political correctness is a con. And that's why I believe it's a con, because of what I just said. Hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, give me a call and I'll explain it again, or read my book. I explain it better in there probably. But emotion is the ingredient in communication that is lacking. We can say words, like an example I use all the time is I could say, I like you, or I can say, Maureen, I like you. That's a whole different message. Or if we get into body language and all that stuff, I can, oh, Maureen, there's a whole different way. What is the real intent of that communication? That's why we get in so much trouble with text and email, because we don't understand 70, 80% of what's being said. We just understand the word. And the word is a very small part of what's really being communicated.
And what we remember.
And what we remember based on our own personal. See, it's what I remember. It's like when I was said to you, 1967, I remembered my personal experience in 1967. So everything is relative to me. The way I see the world, it's real. I'm sitting right here at my desk. I just closed the window. It's my world to me, and everybody out there, it's the world they're seeing from wherever they're sitting or standing or where they are. And that's a very, very limited view of the world, mine or theirs or yours. It's a very limited view.
And if there's no commonality, meaning no place where true connection is being taking place, which social media doesn't do that, and there's no face-to-face, and then we're losing all that we remember, and we're losing all of the emotions. So where do we stand then?
Well, that's at least this Zoom kind of thing is a little bit better. We can see each other's face, and it's not as good as if we were sitting and I was watching you were watching all of my, body language and everything, and sensing. I mean, we sense, and we actually smell and sense, and all the senses come into relating to another person. You've heard that expression. You can smell the fear.
Yeah.
And we all have. And I don't mean to be gross here and talk about body odor or anything, but all of our senses come into play when we communicate. And so many people, and how does it cause problems? So suppose somebody comes to my door and I'm talking to you and I'm talking to them, and then my phone rings and I'm talking on my phone and you're just like, okay, then we're right. Oh, yeah, no, okay. Hey, no, that's right, honey. I'll be back. Yeah. And I talk to my wife back there. And who am I communicating with? Nobody well, right?
Yeah.
It's like all the research they've done on multitasking. So many people think or pride themselves in their ability to multitask.
They find it's a failure.
Studies have shown that that's a very ignorant approach.
Yeah.
Because you cannot remember, you can't focus, you compromise everything you do when you multitask.
So at the end of the day, so the solution is we need to figure out a way to start connecting and communicating again.
And forgive me, let me put in a little whatever. This book, The C for Communication, I'm just going to give you 5 words, and it's 1 word per chapter. The first word is trust. That's chapter 1. Effective communication requires more than talent. It involves trust. That's chapter 1. Respect is chapter 2. We talked a little bit about respect.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 3 is understanding. And that gets into emotional intelligence and the DISC and all the different behavioral styles and all the different body language and all the different things that go into understanding why people say what they say, being able to hear what's not being said. You get that?
Yes.
You really know how to communicate when you can hear what's not being said, and or you can read between the lines. You know, you've all read between the lines, what's in the middle. Forgive me. But, you know, reading between the lines and hearing what's not being said is very, very important. And that's understanding. That's 3rd chapter. Then the 4th chapter, you're going to like this one, Maureen, empathy. Having empathy for the other person and know that they're maybe not as rich, not as smart, not as good looking as Maureen or whatever it is. They're less in some degree or other, and yet having empathy and understanding for them. And then the 5th point, R, is called truer, TRUER, right? Trust, respect, understanding, empathy. And the last R is resolution. You need to come to conclusion. Like, I think that we're coming to conclusion on this little video we're doing because we're coming near the end of the time, right?
I'm going to leave it at that. I will say that absolutely the CEO code is crucial, and the link will be with your interview. And I'm looking forward to sharing this because it's poignant and timely.
Hopefully.
And we need to have this discussion.
Hopefully it was fun and useful for you. And I really appreciate you calling.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.